into your kingdom. It's through your Son's name that we do pray. Amen. When we look at, lost my iPad there for a second. When we look at Abraham, some of the things that we mentioned some of the parallels, and I want to make sure that we kind of went over those parallels again together and make sure that we kind of got on the same page there with some of those parallels. It's very hard. I'm going to pause for a second. Gran, how do you say your granddaughter's last name? Sal. See? Sal. All right. So now we know. I didn't know how to pronounce it, so I had to get help from people. So Sal. Now that we got it from the source, that's good to know. Okay, let's look at this. Let's look at some of these, the sacrifice between Jesus and the sacrifice of Isaac, and as well as let's look at some of the things that made the substitute aspect of the sacrifice of Isaac very, very important. If you remember, we were in Genesis chapter 22. We spent a little time there and looked at some of the things that were going on. But in Genesis 22:13, we said, "And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering." Notice this, instead of his son. What does that mean there? It took the place of his son. Instead of his son being the sacrifice that was to be offered that day, this ram was placed as a substitute for his son. It's a church phone. It's a church phone. So I cut my phone off, but the church phone rang. I guess somebody had something to say in Bible class. If anybody wants to take that and ask what's going on. I think that's the first for me, my phone going off in church. You know, that's why you don't get on to people when the phone goes off in church, because one day it's going to be you. One day it's going to be you. However, notice, there was no substitute for Jesus. Why? Why was there no substitute for Jesus? There's no more fitting substitute. There's nothing that could have lived up to that. But at the same time, why else was there no substitute for Jesus?
Well, it was the once and for all. Until that time, it was just a roll forward, and that was the once that was all, and it had to be perfect. You know, I've always struggled with how God can do that. You know, but only a perfect God could provide a perfect gift. We have nothing. There's nothing of this world that was good enough to offer to God, you know, for that, because that was once and for all. It wasn't just all the sacrifices up until that time was for that person
Putting it off. Yeah.
This sacrifice was for everybody, past, present, and future. It did away with the one before, because those that rolled forward to that point. So it was the one for all. Had to be perfect. Had to be something more special than we could ever imagine, and that could only be provided by God.
I think there's one major thing that we're missing too. Yeah. From the very beginning, from the fall of man itself. What's that one we're forgetting though? Why could there be no substitute for Jesus? Because he already was the substitute. He had already taken our place. There was no one who could take his place, because he had already taken ours. Kind of touching on what you had said. It was the end-all be-all. This was the sacrifice of sacrifices. All the sacrifices that were done before the cross were pushed on towards the cross. It was a putting off of sorts until the cross. And that's one of the most beautiful things about it. Something I definitely didn't understand when I was a kid. Well, a younger kid at least. When I was a younger kid, was that Jesus' death was not just for those who lived after the cross, but it was something that was for those before the cross as well. It was a sacrifice that went in both directions. And one of the most beautiful parts about it is, like we said, it was purpose-built as the sacrifice for our sins. From the very beginning, of time, not just from the fall of man, but even from the very beginning of time, God knew that this would take place. God knew that this would occur. And so He spent thousands of years and countless chapters and countless verses and several books reminding people of the fact that one day there's going to be a sacrifice that puts an end to all these things. And it didn't just put an end to or wipe free the sins of those in the past and those to come. It also helped to usher in new things. Because of that death, because of that resurrection, so many other things were ushered in. The church, a new form of worship to God, a new way in which we can come in contact with God. All these things were ushered in because of this sacrifice. So you look at the sacrifice of Abraham, the sacrifice of Isaac on behalf of Abraham, or however the correct way to word it is. Y'all know what I'm saying? It's not super complex, but it carries with it so much weight. There's so many things that hinted at and pointed to that sacrifice of Jesus. If you've got the handout for lesson 5, it mentions also 1 Peter 2 verse 24. 1 Peter 2 24. He Himself bore our sins in His body on the tree, that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. By His wounds you have been healed. What a beautiful thought there, especially that last part. By His wounds you have been healed. You see the direct parallel between them. Wounds mean that you're not healed, that you're broken, that something's wrong. You've got a wound. It's something that needs to be treated, something that needs to be fixed. You have something that is wrong with you. But by His wounds, that's the thing that actually was the healing for us. That's the thing that filled our lives. Now, something else to remember. While He's hanging on the tree, parts of Him were physically wounded. And at the same time, spiritually, we were being fully fulfilled. We were being fully healed. Our wounds were completely being healed. So in a physical aspect and a spiritual aspect, what Jesus did was perfect in design, perfect in execution, perfect in application. Everything about the sacrifice of Jesus was beautiful. And you think about it too. Without that sacrifice, nothing that we have today would be possible. And adding to that, without the resurrection. You think about some of the message even that Paul delivered, the idea that if these things that we preach are not true, then we of all people would be most miserable. What does he mean by that? Well, you're dedicating your life to something that if it's false, you're building your entire life and your entire existence off of something that did not occur. Now, if you remember, Paul said, but it is true. That's the beauty of it. It is true. The resurrection did occur. The crucifixion did occur. And by it we have life, and through it we have life. Something that was also mentioned is 1 Peter 1 and verse 19. But with the precious blood of Christ, like that of a lamb that is without spot or without blemish. We've got a little section here at the bottom of each, or at the bottom of most of the divisions here. This idea of putting it to work. I don't want to say application. I don't like the word application all that much. I do like the idea of putting something to work. God allowed Abraham to keep his son, but He freely gave His own son. A substitute had to be provided for Isaac, but none could be provided for Jesus, for He was our substitute, or He was our perfect sacrifice, or He was the one that was designed from the beginning to take on the sins of man. Any thoughts on that? Why in Rome in the first century? Yeah.
Why not 2,000 years before or 4,000 years before when the promise received? Or why not 2,000 years later
After.
than now?
Yeah.
Why then? I mean, I got some theories.
Yeah. It's very simple actually, because God said so. No, that's the that mom answer. Well, why? Because I said so. Personally, some of the best ideas as to why it would be that I have seen would be the rapid growth of the world after this moment. That the expansion would occur. I mean, think about what the Romans brought to the world. They brought world travel to the world with their empire, gathering everybody under one umbrella almost. I mean, it's just an expansive empire. So if you could infiltrate the Roman Empire with this message, and spread it through now their road system that did not exist previously. You could spread this message to more people. And you might make the argument, well, what about now? We got the internet. You could go even further. Well, this was one of those first things that kind of brought in that way of expansion. But it's to the reason, I don't know.
That's the only thing that, obviously, I don't think God wanted it done as soon as it could be done.
Yeah.
It's the reason it didn't happen before that. But the only hint in Scripture that I know of, when it mentions the
Fullness of time, yeah. What does that mean, though? Yeah.
All the things came together, and that was as soon as it could come together, and then for the reasons you said, the fullness of time, the roads were there.
Yeah.
They had been dispersed all over, so there was a base of those who knew of God and knew of the coming of Christ. They were all over the world at that time. So unless it's that, but I believe he did it then, because that was as soon as it could have been done. The reason he didn't wait till now.
And I would say even also, you see the judgment pronounced on nations. The judgment, I can't remember which one we were talking about. We were talking about the destruction of the world itself. Why did God choose at this moment to destroy the whole world and save these 8 people? Why didn't he do it earlier, before it had gotten this bad? Well, I think it's one of those moments where he understood the end of this. The world, at least from what we can see from descriptions in Scripture, was past the point of return. And I feel like when we see this idea of fullness of time, God could have done it at any time and it been the fullness of time. I mean, he's the creator of time. But I believe it has this beautiful intricacy between man's free will and human government systems, as well as God's will, all just entangled into one. Now, as to every detail that lined up that made that moment, I don't think we'll ever know. And that's one of them, you sit up at night, stare at the ceiling fan, and never get anywhere with your thought process on it, But at the same time, some have mentioned also that it's one of the most, that what Jesus experienced is one of the most cruel forms of torture and punishment. So maybe it was one of those things that it was the suffering that Jesus had to go through would have been greater at that time than any. But even then, you could make the argument that there's several more things that have been brought on that could do far worse. I don't know. That's some of them beautiful questions, I guess. But even without understanding that, I think the thing that really brings me comfort is you would not have the writings and experience of people like Peter, Paul, James, John, Luke, Matthew. You wouldn't have these things had it happened 1,000 years earlier or 1,000 years later. I mean, they would not have been the ones to see Jesus. They would not. I'm sure there were many others who could have done what they did, but it's just this beautiful, providential picture that is painted for us. That it's just perfect timing. And we also think about. I've been taking this class on Ephesians here lately, and one of the ideas, I'm going to try not to get into it because it has nothing to do with this particularly, and also because now I want to study Ephesians together. But one of the things that they mentioned was this idea of the word apocalypso. And what's the first thing that pops in my mind when we see the word apocalypsis or apocalypse or apocalypso? The end of the world, the destruction of the world, this moment in which everything comes to an end. Well, yes, that word can mean those things, but it also means a revelation or bringing to light of something. So when you see maybe that what Paul experienced on the road as he sees Jesus, what he experienced there was an apocalypse. This was Paul's revelation of God. And so when we think about maybe our personal paths with Jesus and the moment in which we become faithful to God, even the moments in our lives when it becomes the perfect opportunity for our apocalypse, that's when we experience God. That's when we turn to God. Because it is within our minds the moment that it is right for us to turn to God. We think about, I've seen countless people obey the gospel and start their journeys with God. And sometimes you see it at 12. Sometimes you see it at 92. Sometimes you see it from somebody who has never been to church but a handful of times, maybe on Mother's Day or Christmas or something like that, when somebody begged for them to come to church. Sometimes you see it as somebody who sat in the pew for 45, 50 years and has never made the decision until a certain point. I personally have the belief that you follow after God in the moment that is right for you. It's perfect for you. Doesn't mean that you're never going to stray. Doesn't mean that you're never going to fail. But that you make this decision because it's the right decision to make. And it's the best decision to make. We were told in school, we were always told to always be willing to baptize somebody. But put people to the test. Make them show their dedication to it. Especially with like a child or something. One of the things that they said, like, it's camp, it's a long week, they're on sugar highs and sleep deprivation, and they've seen 5 of their buddies get baptized. So what do you do when somebody comes up and you're not sure about their motivation? Well, the thing that we were instructed to do was ask, can you wait till tomorrow? Let's wait till your parents can get here. Can you wait another month or two and let's study it together? Well, the purpose is to show, okay, if you're not willing to drop everything in your life and this is the moment, there's nothing that can stand between me and serving God, maybe you need a little bit more time. The conviction that we have with following after Jesus, with following after God, should be so powerful and so moving that nothing can stand between you and following after God. Nothing can stand between you and obeying the gospel. We think about the commitment that occurs when we accept Jesus as our Savior and put Him on in baptism and become a part of the church. This is the most important decision of your life. This is the most powerful and moving thing that you can do. And so it's not just something that should be done, I guess we'll do it Tuesday. Sounds like a good day. It's supposed to be good weather. Swimming pool will be nice and warm by then. It's something that should be so moving, so powerful, that nothing that you can do or nothing that can be done should stand between you and performing this action of following after God. You see that in the moment with Paul. You see that in the moment of Paul's preaching. Peter's preaching at that. The people at the day of Pentecost. What was the first reaction when they heard what they had done? What shall we do? We don't have exclamation points in Greek. But they're not saying, hey, what are we going to do about it? They're begging. They're begging the disciples of Jesus. What do we do? How do we make this right? What can be done to correct this thing? It's such a moving thing, such a pivotal moment in your life, that nothing can stand between you and it.
Going back to the fullness of time, Matthew 1:17 says, so all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. From David until the captivity in Babylon are 14 generations. And from the captivity in Babylon to Christ are 14 generations. Mm-hmm. So God had a plan. Mm-hmm. That was His fullness of time. Yep. That would be the best explanation. Right.
But why didn't He make it 7? That's the thing. That's like the end. Every time I've gone down that path, I've thought, well, it could have been something else too. Why didn't He make it 3 generations and 3 generations and 3 generations? That's 3 times 3. That's about as perfect as you can get. Why not? It's such a confusion. Yeah, yeah, and God had to give us 2 or 3 chapters of, were you there at the foundation of the earth? Were you there at the... Yeah, exactly. But even in those moments, it's like, man, why God chose then? It's, I can't remember who I had heard from. It was the old joke about, it's crazy that He picked to do it at, 0 AD. Like the thought of doing it crucifying Jesus at 0 AD, which probably wasn't. Our calendar might be a little off there, but that's a whole different story. But just the coincidence that He did that. Yeah, I'm like, well, duh. Yeah, of course. But yeah, it's an interesting path we go down there on that. So the fullness of time. The importance behind it and the understanding of it is Jesus' sacrifice was perfect in all ways. It was perfect in its timing. It was perfect in its planning. It was perfect in its execution. All the things that were done according to plan. You look at the prophecies that were fulfilled. There we go. That were fulfilled in the coming of Christ. This was no incident. This was no accident. This was something that was planned from the very beginning. All right. Let's move to Exodus a little bit. Just for a little bit, though. Not too long. I know when I say turn to Exodus 22, you're thinking there's a whole lot that happened in Genesis. We're going back to it, but there's just a couple promises we got to look at first, a couple things we got to look at. The sixth rendition, or the sixth study here of this journey to Jesus, is the despised birthright. A look at the relationship and the actions of Jacob and Esau. The birthright of somebody in the Israel nation, the birthright of the firstborn, was incredibly complex and carried with it a great amount of weight. And I think that sometimes we might underplay its significance because of the way that it was treated by Esau in this moment. When you look at and we're going to get to the birthright here in just a moment, or at least the betrayal of that birthright for something so simple. But there are 5 main benefits of being the firstborn of your family. The firstborn, the one to inherit this birthright, so to speak. Exodus 22. I got to flip there myself. I looked up and saw 22. I went to Genesis 22. Exodus 22, in verse 29, we see one of the first promises, or one of the first things that were given as a special benefit as being the firstborn of the family. It says, "You shall not delay to offer the fullness of your harvest, and from the outflow of your presses, the firstborn of your sons shall give it to me, or you shall give to me." One of the first things, or one of the first benefits that you see from the firstborn son that the firstborn receives in receiving the birthright was a special relationship, a special dedication to God. And this is going to come into play here in just a little bit with the fifth benefit. The second of which, going back to Genesis 49, Genesis 49, verse 3, the second great benefit was he was next in honor to his parents. Verse 3 says, "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the firstfruits of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power." Deuteronomy 21, verses 17. Deuteronomy 21:17, it shows that he receives a double portion of the inheritance. Verse 17 says, "But he shall acknowledge the firstborn, the son of the unloved, by giving him a double portion of all that he has. For he is the firstfruits of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his." 2 Chronicles, and we'll get all this on the handout so you don't have to be jotting these down as quickly as possible. Oh, I meant to... Y'all got to get on to me for this PowerPoint, y'all. Okay, there we go. That way you have the verses. 2 Chronicles 21 and verse 3 states another fact about this birthright here. "Their father gave them gifts of silver, gold, valuable possessions, together with fortified cities in Judah. But he gave the kingdom of Jeroham because he was the firstborn." Numbers 8, verses 15 through 18. Numbers 8, 15 through 18. You look here, the firstborn would also be considered the spiritual head of the family, before the Levites, of course, if the father were to pass away. "And after the Levites shall go in to serve at the tent of the meeting, when you have cleansed them and offered them as a wave offering, for they are wholly given to me from among the people of Israel. Instead of all who opened the womb, the firstborn of all the people of Israel, I have taken them for myself. For all the firstborn among the people of Israel are mine, both of man and of beast. And on the day that I struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I consecrated them for myself. And I have taken the Levites instead of all the firstborn among the people of Israel." So there's 5 major benefits here to having this birthright. As we can see, the first major benefit behind having this great birthright is a special dedication to God. And you'll notice that this one coincides with the 5th benefit. You've got this responsibility that is to be taken care of in the event of the passing of the father, the patriarch of the family at the time. So you look at the first and the last one and kind of couple them together a little bit. those are very important parts of ancient times, especially before the Levites. They had the responsibility of making intercession between their family and God. They acted as priests before they were priests. They made sacrifices. They offered gifts on altars. They had this relationship with God. And if the father were to pass away, it was then passed to the oldest son to make this connection again, to continue within this. So you think he accepts or he is placed upon his shoulders the importance of the faithfulness of his family. He now has the responsibility of doing what he can and doing everything that he has the power and the will to do to maintain this relationship between his family and God. Now, something that you might see is very interesting, especially when you get into the God's design of the home. It kind of continues with this a little bit. You know, God's design of the home was placed in position for the husband to be the head of the household, to be the one to be responsible for the actions of the household. And you know, you see it not just in Scripture, but time and time again, even in pop culture. You know, you see maybe a dad's going off to war or something. What does he do when he looks at the oldest son? You're the man of the house now. You're the one responsible for taking care of your mom and your siblings. Even the world recognizes this importance of this firstborn, placing a great deal of responsibility upon them to maintain or to take place of the father in the absence of the father. And one thing that was very important, especially in ancient times, was this part of a priestly aspect, to take the place of the spiritual role within the family. So you think, okay, as the firstborn son, that's great benefits. As we can see, these are all benefits, but it's also a lot of pressure. You know, there's a lot of pressure within this, and we'll talk about that a little bit in just we'll talk about that in just a little bit longer.
I think it was more not in the. I think the priests were probably brought on because the proper thing of faith.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't. Yes, they were doing the thing the priests came after. So
Yeah.
the priests were actually
In the same way that Jesus was after the
So to me, the priests were doing the things the fathers
should have done. Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I think we're better to do that because if we did it the way God intended to start it with the fathers, the head of the family, they were the ones responsible, and they were to give. And here we look at this, and when we read other, we think, well, let's just sacrifice their head. It's not what he's talking about doing. It's give them to God.
Yeah.
That's his belonging, not as a sacrifice.
Same way like Hannah gave Samuel.
Very long,
Mm-hmm.
too short, but okay, I'm going to sacrifice that, the firstborn of God. It's not what he had in mind at the time, but the priest came after as a substitute for the father.
Yeah.
It just,
And coincidentally, Jesus came as a substitute for the lack of action on the priests. Yeah, because of failing of the priests. Is this idea of this was in place, but it wasn't good enough. So it had to be replaced. And once again, that system failed, so Jesus had to come on. Not to get too deep into that aspect, but also something that I would like for us to consider is, how many things do you think exist today because of our personal failings? Maybe some things that are in place in power, in action or in work because we as the church failed to do those things. We'll talk about that if we have time. Let's keep looking at this real quick. Received a double portion. Next in honor to his parents. And then we'll look at the received. Next in honor to his parents. Okay, this kind of coincides with what happens with 1 and 5. But at the same time, this is one of those, in the absence of the current system of the parents kind of thing, the honor was to be passed down to the firstborn. You look at the receiving the double portion. Hey, that's a big one. You think you got 2 people, and instead of it being split 50-50, you got split 66.6 repeating by 33.33 repeating. Yeah, good old Uncle Ben.
That's what he wasn't given that to lord it over. He was given it because now I'm responsible for mom.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm responsible for
My siblings.
Now I'm responsible for all those who they did took care of.
Yeah.
So he needed more.
responsibility. Yeah. And the number 4 there, succeeded his father in ruling. These all kind of tie in the same way. It's this idea that the firstborn is to take this position of authority or power or responsibility in the absence of the present responsibility, authority, or power. So you look at these benefits, okay? These things that are both huge responsibilities, but also great benefits. You know, you see especially the honor one. You know, he's next in line of honor to his father. That's a very big deal, especially for a system that greatly exalts the patriarchal role in that system. And so you see that, okay, that's very great. Then you look at Jacob and Esau, and you see all these benefits and all these great things are given away for a bowl of soup. You know, you're giving away for something when you're hungry, something that would temporarily fill your appetite. Let's talk about that for just a moment. Let's look here at Genesis 25. We're going to dive in a little bit to looking at some of the issues that we have here. Beginning with verse 27, it says, "When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, 'Let me eat some of the red stew, for I am exhausted.' Therefore his name was called Edom. Jacob said, 'Sell me your birthright now.' Esau said, 'I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?' Jacob said, 'Swear to me now.' So he swore to him, and he sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright." Okay, let's talk about that for just a moment. Let's kind of break this down a little bit. Notice the way that I've divided it is a little bit is the craftiness of Jacob here. Notice some of the positions that Jacob finds himself in and the decisions that he makes. Notice verse 27, the description of both of them. Esau was a skillful hunter. What does it say? A man of what? Of the field. Skilled worker. Okay. Then we have Jacob. Jacob was a quiet man, what? Dwelling in tents. What's a 21st century modern way of us looking at that and understanding what that means? And it's yeah. It's not necessarily a laziness aspect, but it's a different kind of work aspect. You know, I can't say much. I'm a man who dwells in tents. So this might be the best class for somebody else to preach or to teach on. But you notice there's a difference between them. A pretty major difference, in fact, especially for ancient times. And then you get to verse 29. And Isaac loved Esau. Okay, why did Isaac love Esau? Because of what he hunted for, the meat that he caught for him, food that he gave him. Okay, we don't see why Rachel loved Jacob specifically, but it's very simple. This is favoritism a little bit here. You know, you see the descriptions here. Isaac was very, very fond of Esau, yes, because it was the firstborn, more than likely, yeah. That could definitely be the reason. But Rebekah loved Jacob, and we just see that. It could have been, the feeling bad for him. You never know what it could be. There's a lot that we don't see there. Verse 29 says, once Jacob was cooking a stew, and Esau comes in from the field, and he was exhausted. And notice what it said. Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted." Therefore his name was called Edom. We'll get to that in just a little bit. And Esau said to Jacob, Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright now." Now you think about a conversation that's going on. There's a lot between, bowl of stew and birthright. Okay, there's a pretty big gap, and that seems to be the instance that's the first thing that Jacob goes for. You think Jacob desired that? Yeah, It seems like he had his eye on something. Notice what it said, verse 32. Esau said, I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me? Okay, how many times have y'all heard verse 32 from the mouth of a 7-year-old? I'm so hungry I could die. We ate 15 minutes ago, but you ran around the house 20 times. I'm so hungry I could just fall over and die. I could eat a horse. Esau says in this moment, what use is this birthright to me if I'm dead? If I'm not filled, I'll die. What use of it is to me? I don't think that Esau fully understood. I think he knew what his birthright it would entail. I really don't think that he understood the gravity of what was about to occur here, or what he was doing. And if you'll remember, this crafty brother, he's got some tricks up his sleeve, as we'll see here in just a moment. But notice what it said. And Jacob said, swear to me now. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. When you see this instance of this idea of swear to me now, once again, it takes me back to an idea of a mindset when I was a kid. You know, when you get a pack of gum, you're going to give me a piece, right? Yes. Pinky promise me. It's this idea of this full assurance. I have to know. I have to have your word in order to take it as is. And so he swears to him his birthright in exchange for, as Esau describes it here, this red stew. I have no idea what that means. Could means 2 minutes. Oh, we talked about that. He's giving me heads up now since we don't have a heads up bell. And so when he threw up a 2, I was thinking, 2 what? 2 bowls of stew? Did I miss that? I don't know. Yes, there were 2 brothers in there, Mr. Randy. Yeah. No, I appreciate it. Sorry for calling you out. So you see this moment where it's this red stew. Okay, what is this red stew? I don't know. Some have said it's beans. Some have said it's broth. Doesn't matter. It's a bowl of stew. It's a soup. And he is selling his birthright for some soup here. Esau, as we said, makes mention of this. I'm about to die. Of what use do I have for this birthright? Jacob makes him to swear to send him or sell him his birthright. In verse 34, then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew. We see the lentil stew there, some beans. And he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. That's a little... Yeah. And you see this coming true in one of the most ridiculous ways that it could come true. I mean, I don't want to say too much because I've made some dumb decisions in my life too. Maybe not giving away the birthright, but let's look also at Genesis 25. Man, they really like that bell right now. In a few weeks, I'll be speaking out of town next week. Mr. Dale's going to be teaching on something. I can't remember yet. I don't think Mr. Dale remembers yet, so we'll see. But Mr. Dale's going to be taking over Bible class for us next week. One thing I do want us to mention, I don't think we've announced it too awful much. We're not keeping it a secret. I just keep forgetting to include it in the announcements. During the summer, we are still going to meet in the auditorium, but we're going to be having a summer series, and we're going to be having a different speaker come and speak to us every Wednesday night. And they'll deliver the Bible class for the adults, which the Under the Stairs class will also be attending in the auditorium on Wednesday nights. And so we'll all study together under a different speaker, and we're going to look at some of the teachings of Jesus and James, some of the parallels between those, and some of the great lessons that we can learn from the mouth of Jesus and one of his great disciples. But that won't kick off until June, and that'll carry on through June, July, and August. So it'll take place all next quarter and on Wednesday night.